On the morning of August 16, 1942, a United States Navy blimp lifted off from Treasure Island Naval Air Station in San Francisco Bay. Its mission was routine, a coastal patrol over the Pacific Ocean, searching for Japanese submarines that had been prowling America's western shores. The airship was designated L-8, a 250-foot dirigible filled with helium, designed for anti-submarine warfare. Two experienced Navy officers were at the controls. By early afternoon, the blimp returned. It drifted over the San Francisco coastline, engines still running, radio silent. It descended erratically, clipping power lines, scraping rooftops, finally colliding with a house in Daly City before settling onto a street. Coast Guard personnel and military police rushed to the scene. They approached the gondola cautiously, unsure what they would find inside. What they discovered defied explanation. The cabin was empty. Both pilots were gone. The engines were running. The radio was functional. The life jackets were still in place. The emergency raft was secured. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no damage to the craft that would suggest violence or catastrophe. The men had simply vanished. To this day, no one knows what happened to them. Their disappearance remains one of the strangest unsolved mysteries of World War II. This is the story of the ghost blimp, and the question that has haunted investigators for over 80 years, where did the pilots go? The year is 1942. America has been at war for 8 months. The attack on Pearl Harbor has transformed the nation overnight. Fear of invasion grips the West Coast. Japanese submarines have been spotted off California. Ships have been torpedoed within sight of shore. The Navy responds by deploying lighter-than-air craft for coastal patrol. Blimps, dirigibles, airships that can hover for hours, scanning the ocean surface for enemy periscopes. These are not the massive, rigid airships like the Hindenburg. These are smaller, non-rigid blimps, envelopes of rubberized fabric filled with helium, suspended beneath a control car that houses the crew and equipment. They're slow. Maximum speed around 60 miles per hour. But they're perfect for submarine hunting. They can stay aloft for extended periods. They can descend to wave height or climb to observe from altitude. And they're quiet, giving them an advantage when listening for the sound of enemy engines. By the summer of 1942, Squadron ZP-32 is operating out of Moffett Field and Treasure Island, conducting daily patrols along the California coast. The blimps carry depth charges. They carry observers with binoculars. They maintain constant radio contact with shore stations. The missions are considered relatively safe. Routine, even. The real danger is out there in the dark water, where submarines lurk beneath the surface. No, one expects the danger to come from within the blimp itself. L-8 is one of several airships assigned to the squadron. It's a standard configuration, 250 feet long, 60 feet in diameter, capable of carrying a crew of 2 or 3 and staying airborne for up to 20 hours. On August 16, 1942, 2 men are assigned to fly her. Lieutenant Ernest DeWitt Cody, age 27, the pilot in command, a native of California, experienced in lighter-than-air operations, married with a young family waiting at home. By all accounts, a competent and cautious officer. Ensign Charles Ellis Adams, age 35, the co-pilot. Older than his rank would suggest, He came to the Navy later in life, a skilled aviator, methodical and professional. Neither man has given any indication of problems. No reports of illness, no financial troubles, no personal conflicts. They are simply two Navy officers doing their duty. Their assignment that morning is straightforward. Patrol the waters west of San Francisco, searching for Japanese submarines. Report any sightings. Drop depth charges if necessary. Return to base by early afternoon. It should be a routine flight. One of dozens they've completed before, but on this day, something will go terribly wrong. The morning of August 16th dawns clear and cool. Visibility is excellent. Weather conditions are ideal for patrol operations. At 6 a.m., L8 is prepared for flight. The envelope is inspected. The engines are tested. Fuel tanks are topped off. Depth charges are loaded. Cody and Adams arrive for their pre-flight briefing. They review their patrol area, radio frequencies, and emergency procedures. Nothing unusual is noted in the mission orders. At 7:38 a.m., L8 lifts off from Treasure Island. The blimp rises smoothly, turns westward, and heads out over the Golden Gate Bridge toward the open ocean. Ground observers watch it disappear into the morning haze. Just another patrol, just another day. For the next few hours, everything proceeds normally. L8 follows its assigned route, cruising at low altitude over the Pacific. Cody and Adams maintain regular radio contact with shore stations, reporting their position and observations. Nothing is sighted. The ocean appears empty. No submarines. No surface vessels of concern. At 7:50 a.m., L8 radios that they are investigating an oil slick approximately 3 miles offshore from the Farallon Islands. Oil slicks can indicate a submarine presence, either from leaking fuel or from a vessel attempting to obscure its wake. This is significant. This is what they're out here to find. A fishing boat in the area. The Daisy Gray observes L8 descending toward the water. The blimp drops to low altitude, circling the oil slick. The crew watches as the airship makes several passes, clearly investigating something below. At 8:15 a.m., L8 radios again. They report continuing to investigate the oil slick. No further details are provided. The transmission is routine, professional. And then silence. No distress call. No emergency transmission. Nothing to indicate trouble. The last confirmed sighting of L8 with both crew members. Aboard is at approximately 8:20 a.m. Still circling the oil slick at low altitude. After that, the record becomes fragmentary, unclear, disputed. Some witnesses on the Farallon Islands report seeing the blimp ascending rapidly shortly after 8:20 m. Others claim to have seen it drifting eastward back toward the coast at a higher altitude than before, but no one sees the pilots. No one witnesses anything happening inside the gondola. The blimp simply continues on, now silent, no longer responding to radio calls from shore. By 10 a.m., concern is growing. L8 has failed to make its scheduled radio check. Multiple attempts to raise the crew by radio go unanswered. At 10:30 a.m., reports begin coming in from the coast. A blimp has been sighted over the beach at Fort Funston, south of San Francisco. It's flying erratically, altitude fluctuating, drifting with the wind. Navy aircraft are dispatched to locate and observe L8. When they find it, what they see is deeply unsettling. The blimp is flying on its own. Gondola doors are open. The craft is ascending and descending unpredictably, as if no one is at the controls, because no one is at 11:15 a.m. L8 drifts over Ocean Beach. Witnesses on the ground look up and see the airship passing low overhead. Engines running but clearly uncontrolled. It continues inland, losing altitude gradually. It clips power lines near the beach, causing sparks and minor electrical fires. It scrapes the roof of a building carrying fabric from the envelope at approximately 11:30 a.m. L8 descends into the residential neighborhood of Daly City. It strikes a house on Bellevue Avenue, collapsing part of the structure. The impact tears open the envelope, releasing helium. The blimp settles onto the street, deflating slowly. The engines are still running. The propellers are still spinning, but inside the gondola there is no one. Coast Guard personnel arrive within minutes. Military police secure the scene. Investigators approach the crumpled airship cautiously. Unsure what they'll find, the gondola doors are open. Both of them. Swinging in the breeze, inside the control cabin is intact. Instruments are functioning. The radio is operational. Fuel levels are adequate. The engines, still idling, show no signs of mechanical failure. 2 life jackets are neatly stowed in their designated places. The emergency life raft is secured and unused. Personal items belonging to Cody and Adams are present: a briefcase, a jacket, a cap. On the control panel, the microphone hangs from its cord, as if someone had been in the middle of a radio transmission, but there are no pilots. No bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle or violence. The depth charges are still armed and attached. If there had been a submarine attack, if the crew had attempted to engage an enemy, the weapons would have been released. They weren't. More disturbing still, one of the gondola doors appears to have been deliberately opened from the inside. The latch is in the unlocked position. Someone opened that door intentionally. But why? And where did they go? Outside, investigators search the crash site and the surrounding area. No bodies are found. No parachutes. No evidence that anyone jumped or fell from the blimp. The trajectory of L8's flight is retraced. Search teams are dispatched to the area offshore where the oil slick was reported. Ships and aircraft scan the water for any sign of the missing men. Nothing is found. No wreckage. No bodies. No debris. Cody and Adams have simply disappeared. The Navy launches an immediate investigation. This is wartime. 2 officers are missing under inexplicable circumstances. Every possibility must be considered. Could this have been an enemy attack? Japanese submarines are known to be operating in the area. Perhaps L8 encountered one. Perhaps the submarine surfaced and captured or killed the crew. But there's no evidence of gunfire. No damage to the blimp consistent with weapons fire. No signs of combat. And why would a submarine crew bother to capture the pilots of a blimp? Why not simply destroy the aircraft? And if the crew had been under attack, why didn't they send a distress call? The radio was working. They had time to send a message. They didn't. Could it have been a mechanical failure? Perhaps a sudden loss of altitude forced the pilots to bail out over the ocean. But again, the evidence doesn't fit. The engines were functioning perfectly when the blimp was recovered. There were no malfunctions, no system failures, and if the crew had needed to abandon ship, they would have taken the life jackets. They would have deployed the emergency raft. Everything was left behind. Could they have fallen out accidentally? Perhaps while investigating the oil slick, one of them leaned out too far and fell. The other tried to rescue him and also fell. It's possible, but unlikely. The gondola doors have safety restraints. The crew would have been trained to avoid such risks. And even if one man fell, why would the other immediately follow? Why not radio for help first? Could there have been carbon monoxide poisoning from the engines? Perhaps both men were overcome by fumes, became disoriented, and somehow exited the craft without realizing what they were doing. Navy investigators test the engine exhaust systems. They find no defects. The ventilation in the gondola was adequate, and carbon monoxide poisoning typically causes incapacitation before it causes the kind of deliberate action required to open a door and exit an aircraft. Could it have been sabotage? Perhaps the oil slick was a lure. Perhaps enemy agents on a submarine, or hidden on the Farallon Islands, somehow boarded L8 and abducted the crew. But how? The blimp was observed continuously by witnesses on the fishing boat. No one saw another vessel approach. No one saw anyone boarding the airship. And again, there would have been time for a distress call. Could the pilots have deserted? Perhaps they staged the entire incident to fake their deaths and escape from military service. It seems absurd, but investigators are required to consider it. They examined the personal lives of both men, financial records, family relationships, any indication of motive. They find nothing. Cody was happily married with a young child. Adams had no known troubles. Neither man had debts, legal problems, or any apparent reason to vanish. And desertion doesn't explain the physical evidence. If they had planned to abandon the blimp, why leave it flying? Why not simply land it somewhere remote and walk away? Why create such an elaborate mystery? The official investigation continues for weeks. Dozens of witnesses are interviewed. Technical experts analyze every component of the blimp. The Navy's conclusions are frustratingly vague. The final report, dated September 1942, states that the cause of the crew's disappearance cannot be determined. The evidence is insufficient to support any definitive theory. The most likely scenario, investigators suggest, is that one pilot fell or jumped from the craft for unknown reasons, and the other attempted a rescue, leading to both men being lost at sea. But even this explanation is acknowledged to be speculation. The truth is that no one knows what happened. Ernest Cody and Charles Adams are officially listed as missing in action, presumed dead. Their families are notified. Memorial services are held, but their bodies are never recovered. No trace of them is ever found. The case is quietly filed away. The Navy has a war to fight. There are more pressing concerns than an unsolvable mystery, but the questions remain. And over the decades, the story of the ghost blimp refuses to fade. In the years following the incident, various theories have emerged, some more plausible than others. One theory suggests that Cody and Adams discovered something in the water, not just an oil slick, but actual evidence of a Japanese submarine. Perhaps they descended to get a closer look. Perhaps they decided to manually drop a depth charge. This would require one of them to lean out of the gondola. Perhaps he lost his grip. Perhaps he fell. The other pilot, seeing his comrade in the water, might have attempted a rescue. He might have tried to descend closer to the surface, opened the door to throw a line or the life raft, and then, somehow, he also went over. Perhaps a sudden updraft caught the blimp as the door was open. Perhaps he was partially outside when the craft rose suddenly. Perhaps he was pulled out. It's a plausible scenario, but it requires a series of increasingly unlikely events, and it still doesn't explain why no distress call was sent, why no emergency equipment was deployed. Another theory points to the possibility of a rogue wave. If WWII was hovering very low over the ocean surface, a large wave might have struck the gondola, flooding the cabin or even pulling the crew out through the open door. But witnesses who saw the blimp investigating the oil slick reported it was at a safe altitude, and there were no reports of unusually rough seas that day. Some have suggested that one or both pilots might have suffered a sudden medical emergency, a heart attack, a stroke, something that caused incapacitation, so rapid they couldn't call for help. But this doesn't explain how both men would have left the craft. If one collapsed, the other would have radioed immediately. If both were stricken simultaneously, which seems highly improbable, they would have remained in the gondola, not vanished entirely. Over the years, more exotic theories have been proposed. Some believe the pilots were abducted by the Japanese submarine they were investigating, that special forces from the sub somehow boarded the blimp, captured the crew, and returned to their vessel before anyone noticed. There's no evidence for this, but it remains a possibility, however remote. Others have speculated about more outlandish scenarios: aliens, time anomalies, dimensional portals, the usual array of paranormal explanations that attach themselves to any unsolved mystery. These can be safely dismissed. Whatever happened to Cody and Adams, it had a rational explanation. We simply don't know what it was. In 2000, nearly 60 years after the incident, the Naval Historical Center conducted a review of the case. New researchers examined the old files, hoping modern forensic knowledge might shed light on the mystery. Their conclusion was essentially the same as the original investigation. The evidence is insufficient. The most likely scenario involves an accident during the investigation of the oil slick, followed by an attempted rescue that went wrong. But they acknowledged that this explanation requires assumptions not supported by physical evidence. The truth is that we simply don't know, and we probably never will. The story of L8 has become part of American folklore. It's been featured in books about unsolved mysteries, television documentaries, podcast episodes, countless websites dedicated to unexplained phenomena. It's been compared to other famous disappearances. The Mary Celeste, the merchant ship found abandoned in 1872. Flight 19. The Navy aircraft that vanished over the Bermuda Triangle in 1945. The crew of the MV Joy Ita, found adrift in the Pacific in 1955. All cases where people vanished from vehicles that remained intact. All cases where the evidence seemed to contradict every logical explanation. The ghost blimp is unique among these because it happened during wartime, under conditions of military scrutiny, with witnesses observing the craft until the moment of its landing. And still no answer. Some who study the case believe the truth was known but suppressed, that the Navy discovered what happened but classified the findings for reasons of military security or morale, that somewhere in an archive a file exists that contains the answer, but if such a file exists, it has never been found, and given the passage of time, it seems unlikely it ever will be. What we're left with is a story, a mystery. Two men who flew out over the Pacific one August morning in 1942 and never returned. Their families never got closure. Cody's widow spent years hoping for news, any news, of what had happened to her husband. She received none. Adam's family held memorial services without a body to bury, without even certainty that he was dead. For them, the mystery wasn't fascinating or intriguing. It was agony. An open wound that never healed. In San Francisco, the story lingers. Old-timers in Daly City remember when the blimp crashed into Bellevue Avenue. Some claim to have been there, to have seen it come down. The house that was struck still stands, repaired long ago, with no marker to indicate what happened there. At Treasure Island, where L-8 took off that morning, nothing remains of the Naval Air Station. The base was closed decades ago. The hangars were torn down. The runways were repaved, but the memory persists. Among naval historians, among aviation enthusiasts, among those who are drawn to unsolved mysteries. Every August 16th, a few people remember. They think about Ernest, Cody, and Charles Adams. They wonder what those final moments were like, what the pilots saw, what they experienced, why they made the choices they made, if they made choices at all. If it wasn't simply fate or chance, or some combination of circumstances too improbable to reconstruct. The blimp itself, L-8, was repaired and returned to service. It flew additional patrols for the remainder of the war. It survived even as its crew did not. After the war, it was decommissioned and eventually scrapped. No trace of it remains. Just photographs in archives, technical specifications in old manuals, and the story of that one flight when it returned without its pilots. World War II claimed millions of lives. Soldiers, sailors, airmen, civilians. So many deaths that two more hardly seem significant in the vast accounting of that terrible conflict. But there's something about this case that won't let go. Perhaps it's the intimacy of it. Just two men, a routine mission, a beautiful morning, and then, inexplicably, they're gone. Perhaps it's the eerie image of the blimp drifting back to land on its own, engines running, doors open, as if offering us one last look at the scene of whatever happened, as if challenging us to solve the mystery. Or perhaps it's simply the reminder that even in a war filled with death and destruction, there are still things we don't understand, still questions we can't answer, still mysteries that resist all our attempts at explanation. But there's more to this story than just the mystery of the disappearance itself. There's what came after, the ripples that spread outward from that August morning, the lives that were changed, the questions that multiplied rather than diminished with time. Lieutenant Cody's widow, Doris, was 24 years old when her husband vanished. Their daughter was barely 2. For months she held on to hope that somehow, impossibly, he might still be alive, that he might have washed ashore somewhere, that he might have been captured and would return when the war ended. She wrote letters to the Navy Department, requesting updates, asking if new searches had been conducted, pleading for any information, anything at all, that might explain what happened to her husband. The responses were always the same: polite, sympathetic, and utterly uninformative. The Navy could tell her nothing more than what she already knew. Her husband had disappeared. The cause was unknown. The case remained open, though no active investigation was ongoing. In 1943, a year after the incident, the Navy officially declared both men dead. It was a bureaucratic necessity. Death certificates needed to be issued. Benefits needed to be processed. Widows needed to move on with their lives. But how do you move on when there are no answers? When the person you loved simply vanished, leaving behind only questions? Doris Cody never remarried. She raised her daughter alone, working to support them both. And every year, on August 16th, she would spend the day in quiet reflection, thinking about her husband, wondering what his final moments had been like, whether he had thought of her, whether he had suffered. She died in 1987, 45 years after the incident. She never learned what happened to Ernest Cody. The mystery outlived her. Charles Adams' mother faced a similar torment. She had already lost her husband years earlier. Charles was her only son. When the Navy informed her of his disappearance, something broke inside her that never healed. She became obsessed with the case. She contacted psychics, hoping they might provide insight. She wrote to newspapers, urging them to investigate. She even traveled to San Francisco herself in 1944, walking the route the blimp had taken, standing at the crash site, as if proximity to the location might somehow reveal the truth. It didn't. The answers weren't there. They weren't anywhere. In her final years, suffering from dementia, she would sometimes speak as if Charles were still alive, as if he were still out there somewhere, on patrol, and would be coming home soon. Perhaps in her declining mind, that version of reality was kinder than the truth. The crew of the fishing boat Daisy Gray, who witnessed L8 investigating the oil slick that morning, carried their own burden. They were among the last people to see the blimp with its crew aboard. For years afterward, they were interviewed repeatedly by investigators, journalists, and researchers, each time forced to relive those moments, to describe again what they had seen, to face again the question, did you notice anything unusual? The answer was always no. Nothing had seemed wrong. The blimp had been conducting a routine investigation. There had been no signs of distress, no indication that within minutes both pilots would be gone. One crew member from the Daisy Gray, interviewed in the 1970s, said he still thought about it, still wondered if there was something he had missed, some detail that might have explained everything. He said the not knowing was worse than any explanation could have been, because without an answer, his imagination filled the void with increasingly dark possibilities. And then there are the other members of Squadron ZP-32, the pilots and crews who flew similar missions, who knew Cody and Adams personally, who understood that what happened to them could have happened to anyone. After the incident, morale in the squadron dropped. Fear crept in. If two experienced officers could vanish without explanation, what did that mean for the rest of them? What unknown danger lurked out there over the Pacific? The Navy responded by implementing new safety protocols. Blimps on patrol would now carry a minimum of 3 crew members instead of 2. Additional radio checks were mandated. More emphasis was placed on staying in visual contact with surface vessels when possible, but these measures felt inadequate. They were responses to a known problem. And the problem with the L-8 incident was that no one knew what the problem had been. You can't protect against an unknown threat. Several pilots requested transfers to other duties. They weren't cowards. They simply couldn't shake the feeling that flying blimps along the California coast had become something more dangerous than anyone wanted to admit. The Navy denied most of these requests. The war effort required every available crew. Personal fears were secondary to military necessity. So they kept flying, day after day, patrol after patrol. And every time they passed over the waters near the Farallon Islands, every time they investigated an oil slick, they thought about Cody and Adams, and they wondered if they would be next. Remarkably, no similar incident ever occurred. For the remainder of the war, Squadron ZP-32 operated without losing another crew under mysterious circumstances. Men died, certainly. There were accidents, mechanical failures, even enemy action in a few cases, but no one else simply vanished. Whatever happened on August 16, 1942, it was unique, an anomaly, a perfect storm of circumstances that has never been repeated. And somehow, that makes it even more unsettling. In 1952, 10 years after the incident, a man came forward claiming to have information about the disappearance. He said he had been a Japanese submarine officer during the war. He claimed that his vessel had been operating near the Farallon Islands on the morning of August 16, 1942. According to his account, they had spotted the American blimp investigating the area. The submarine captain had considered surfacing to attack, but decided against it. The blimp posed no immediate threat, and attacking it might reveal their position to nearby patrol vessels. So they had remained submerged and slipped away. The man insisted they had not attacked L-8, had not boarded it, had not even come close to it. They had simply observed it from below and departed. If his story was true, it confirmed that a submarine had indeed been present. It validated Cody and Adams' report of the oil slick, but it did nothing to explain what happened to them. The Navy investigated the man's claims. They found inconsistencies in his account, details that didn't match Japanese naval records, timelines that didn't align. The man was either mistaken about which submarine he had served on, or about when and where the encounter had occurred, or he was fabricating the entire story for reasons unknown. The lead went nowhere. Just another dead end in a case full of them. In the decades since, other alleged witnesses have come forward periodically, people claiming to have seen something that day, to know something about what happened. Each time, investigators and researchers get briefly excited, hoping finally for a breakthrough. And each time, the information proves unreliable. Mistaken memories, confused timelines, outright fabrications. The truth, if it exists, remains hidden, lost somewhere in the past, buried beneath layers of time and fading recollection. Perhaps that's appropriate. Perhaps some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Perhaps the absence of an answer is itself the point. because the mystery of L8 isn't really about what happened to two Navy pilots in 1942. It's about the limits of human knowledge, about the things we can't control or predict or understand. No matter how much we investigate, it's about the randomness of fate, the fragility of life, the way someone can be here one moment and gone the next, leaving behind only questions and grief. Ernest DeWitt Cody and Charles Ellis Adams disappeared on August 16, 1942. They were 27 and 35 years old. They were doing their duty, serving their country, protecting the coast from enemy submarines. They flew out over the Pacific Ocean one summer morning, and they never came back. Somewhere in those waters their story ended. We don't know how. We don't know why. We don't know where their remains might rest. If they rest anywhere at all, what we know is that they vanished, completely, without explanation, and for more than 80 years. That question has echoed across the decades. Where did they go? What happened in those moments between the last radio transmission and the blimp's return? Was it an accident? A tragedy born of split-second decisions and terrible luck? Or was it something else? Something we haven't considered? Something the evidence doesn't reveal? We may never know. The witnesses are gone. The physical evidence has long since been destroyed or lost. The ocean keeps its secrets, but the story remains. A ghost blimp drifting over San Francisco on a summer afternoon. Two pilots who stepped into history and then stepped out of existence. Somewhere over the Pacific on a clear August morning in 1942, something happened. Something that took Ernest Cody and Charles Adams from this world and left behind only questions. The war moved on. The world moved on. But they did not. They remained frozen in that moment, forever flying over the ocean, forever investigating that oil slick, forever making whatever decision or facing whatever fate led to their disappearance. And we remain here, looking back across the years, wondering, searching for answers in old files and faded photographs, trying to reconstruct those final moments from fragments and speculation. Perhaps one day someone will find something, a piece of wreckage washed ashore, a document in an archive, some overlooked detail that finally makes sense of it all. Or perhaps the ocean will keep its secret forever. Perhaps this is one mystery that was never meant to be solved. Either way, the ghost blimp remains, a story told and retold, a reminder that even in the modern age, with all our technology and knowledge, there are still things we cannot explain. There are still men who vanish into thin air. There are still questions without answers, and there are still mysteries that haunt us decades after the fact, refusing to be forgotten. This is the story of L8, the ghost blimp of World War II, and the two Navy pilots who flew into legend on a summer morning in 1942. Ernest DeWitt Cody, Charles Ellis Adams, remembered, honored, still missing. Still, after all these years, somewhere out there beyond the Golden Gate, where the fog rolls in and the ocean stretches to the horizon, still flying, still searching, still lost,